All right, The Master and Margarita by Bulgakov on the 16th of January today. Um, so this book I really appreciate just because I think it's kind of like a really good representation of what I really like with Russian literature. It talks a lot about politics and emotions and scenery, and at the same time is very whimsical and magical, and it just integrates a lot of things that I really appreciate that I've seen in Russian authors. So yeah, we could go ahead and talk a little bit about it. So, about the author, he was born in 1891 in Kiev. He studied medicine briefly at Kiev University, but was drafted by the anti Bolsheviks, also the Whites or the White Army, in 1918 as a field doctor. After that experience, he gravitated more towards journalism. And then was sent to work in Moscow Art Theater in 1929 after directly complaining to Stalin. So he actually wrote a letter to the government saying that there was a lack of work for authors and people involved in the theater. And so they sent him there, which I found kind of funny because he managed to get banned very frequently, if not all the time. He talks a lot about themes of artists versus repressive government. He did a lot of adaptations of Pushkin and Don Quixote. Um, Pushkin is a very, very huge name in Russian literature. There's a phrase in the book that a lot of Russians use, which is "Who's going to pay the bills?" Pushkin, kind of demonstrating how popular and ubiquitous he is in the daily life of Russian people. He's kind of like their national poet. Um, and then, yes, it was frequently banned from performance. He wrote The Master and Margarita before his death in 1940, but the novel was released much later in 1966 by a monthly magazine, Moskva, in two parts from 1966 to 1967. He actually dictated the novel to his third wife right before his death. And in the foreword of the version of the book that I have, it actually said that in a couple of the corners of the pages of his first written draft, it said, "Oh, please, God, help me publish my book." So I think he had probably had trouble completing it, just as much trouble as sometimes we have finishing such large books ourselves. Um, and then it actually gained extraordinary popularity as an underground work. Censorship was still a big issue in the 1940s, obviously, and in the middle of the century, but it eventually gained enough popularity and kind of endurance to become probably one of the most famous Russian novels out there. His other works are The White Guard and Days of the Turbans. So, Lenin, the Bolsheviks, and the Rise of the Soviet Union. November 6th, 1917, the Russian Revolution. It was the end of the Romanov dynasty and takeover by Bolsheviks led by Vladimir Lenin. It was like the Communist Party takeover, Red Army specifically. 1929 to 1953, the Stalin dictatorship is kind of enduring. Peasant society to military industrial power, the Great Purge in 1934, 750,000 people were killed to eliminate opposition. And then the beginnings of World War II in 1939, Stalin and Hitler packed to invade Poland, Romania, Estonia, Latvia, Lithuania, and Finland. So just in general, I think Russian literature is so profound and heavy because there was a lot going on in their country. There's a lot of fluctuations, a lot of fear, a lot of poverty, huge kind of divides between the poor classes and the richer classes. Um, I think the feudal system or the peasant system, I think it was called, was officially abolished in the 1860s. But there were still a lot of remnants of that, and just the country was having a very difficult time feeding people and taking care of people. So you see a lot of that in these books. It's very emotional, and there's a lot of struggles and so on and so forth. And the next slide. All right, more on the Bolsheviks. Oh yeah, so 1861 serfdom had ended, and there's a huge gap between rich and poor. The movement against the Tsar system. So kind of there was a Tsar system, and then it started leading into what we probably are more familiar with, which is the association with communism in the 20th century. Bolshevik is Russian for one of the majority. It's a wing of Russian Social Democratic Workers' Party led by Vladimir Lenin, whereas the Mensheviks, those of the minority. And then the name was eventually changed to the Russian Communist Party in 1918, and then following a few different name changes up until I think the 1960s. Kind of supported a highly centralized, disciplined system, and it was popular among urban workers and soldiers. It was anti-capitalist and complete confiscation of private property. It was considered robbery of the workers. And then kind of in relation to what we're talking about more so, the censorship carried out was to act in accordance with the official ideology and politics of the Communist Party, destruction of pre-revolutionary and foreign books. So we see a lot of undertones of that and overtones, I guess, in The Master and Margarita, where there's a scene in the theater that in kind of a dream one of the characters is having, where people are sitting in the theater and are called up and are required to turn over their private possessions, and there's a mystical figure that actually has knowledge of everything that they have that would constitute wealth. And so there was a lot of paranoia, and people generally didn't know what to do in regards to their safety, and didn't know if they would be well the next day, or so there was a lot of day-to-day fear in regards to the society, things changing very rapidly. Next slide. So there are a lot of characters in this book, and they have very Russian names. And with Russian books, you can have two names. There's a more formal name, and then there's nicknames, and it goes by patronymics. So there's kind of, it's nice, maybe sometimes for me at least, I write a name down once or twice and then associate it with the nickname, and then I figure out who's who. But this book had quite a few characters. We were lucky in that the main ones were pretty easy to identify, and that they were very strange for the most part. So Woland, aka Satan, he's actually acts as a mirror to society. He's a theatrical devil, and he's present during the Pilate story as a sparrow. That's never overtly said, but it's heavily nuanced. Woland's retinue, or his posse, is Azazello, which actually is a name derived from, it's a reference to the goat that they put the sins on and released in the desert. Hela, which is the naked woman, actually, who's the servant, and I think she's some sort of witch. Behemoth is the giant cat. And Koroviev is the man in the kind of plaid suit. That's Satan's kind of right-hand man. And they're not as satanic as I would say. They're more goofy, and they do strange things, and they play chess, and they have wine, and they throw undead balls, and just kind of have a very I guess fancy, elegant lifestyle that's kind of comical throughout the book. There's a lot of humor. I think that Bulgakov deliberately does that. And then in the beginning of the book, we encounter Ivan homeless, and he's the apprentice to Berlioz, and Berlioz loses his head in the beginning, which is predicted by Woland. And Ivan and Berlioz in the beginning of the story are talking about how to write something about atheism, and that human beings are ultimately in charge of what happens to them. And they encounter Woland, who's the devil at that time in disguise. And I think this gestures towards the attempt that the country made at the time to actually eliminate religion. And a lot of Russian authors, including Dostoevsky, actually played a lot with what it meant to abandon that, and what it meant to survive as a human being with a God that sometimes, or it felt like most of the time to them, didn't talk back. Yeshua Anosri, I think that's the Aramaic name for Jesus. And throughout the book, the story of Jesus is integrated in, and it's referring to the master's novel. So the master is a character in the main story, and he's writing a book about Pontius Pilate. And a lot of people make fun of him because it seems like such a random topic. Pontius Pilate is described in very much detail, and he struggles a lot with the execution of Yeshua. Um, then there's Matthew Levi, who is one of the disciples that we know of, but in this book, he's described as being very disoriented and not very organized, and Yeshua is actually afraid that he's writing down things wrong. So there's kind of an interesting element of humor and a different take on a lot of religious stories that Bulgakov inserts, I think both to entertain us and maybe just to kind of stir things up a little bit. Margarita is the woman in the story that is in love with the master. So the master is a writer, and Margarita is a married woman who's 30 and childless and has a lot of resources, but just isn't in love with her husband and is very in love with the master. And she essentially agrees with the devil to attend one of his balls and be the queen witch and essentially entertain a lot of guests who are very famous from history for being poisoners, etc., people who have sinned in the past, in order to be reunited with the master. The master was experiencing a lot of paranoia because of publishing his book and was censored quite a bit. And it is said that the master is a huge reference to what Bulgakov experienced. And there's a lot of kind of parallels between the master and Bulgakov because he largely struggled as an author with being censored himself. Likodiv and Bosoy are two administrators that run the apartment of Berlioz, which ends up being Satan's stomping ground. And the struggle with the apartment is actually talking a lot about how renting in the 20th century in Kiev and Moscow was very difficult, and people would fight over apartments because there was no space. So you'd often have families that lived, multiple families that would live in one apartment. And it refers a lot to, I think it's called a primus oven, where it's just kind of like a mobile flame with gas that people used in order to cook. And I think that Bulgakov kind of humorously talks about the troubles with Berlioz's apartment and who wants to inherit it, etc., because he wanted to highlight how much people were struggling with having a living space. And I mean, this was a huge concern for a lot of people, and they were very desperate in regards to finding apartments for themselves and their families. So that was integrated quite a bit into the novel. Okay, so there's a lot of, if you got into the book at all, you can see that there's a lot of footnotes and there's a lot of references to things. There's a lot of references to history. There's a lot of references to literature. I think that Russian authors like to do that. And I think when they're writing in the time that they were, there was so much of the same literature or art kind of fluctuating around them, at least if they could access it, that a lot of them cross-referenced one another. So when you start reading more and more Russian literature, you can actually find that there's a lot of, I guess, references to different famous works. So for example, Faust, I've seen referenced in probably like 3 or 4 Russian author books that I've read, quite a bit in Dostoevsky. Yes, there's a lot of parallels to today. I think so too, Otto. And so Faust in particular is a legend from around 1580 to, I made a typo there, but 15. It's basically like late 16th century. Tells of a scholar who sells his soul to the devil. It's based on an astrologer and alchemist who live in northern Germany in the 15th century. So that's kind of like the base legend. And then there was a lot of authors that chose to rewrite it and proliferate it. Faust makes a deal with the devil. He commits his soul to eternal damnation in return for power and knowledge in his life. And like I said, there are multiple versions that were recreated by more modern authors, the most accepted being Faust by John Wolfgang von Goethe. I think that's how you say his name. And it was published in 2 parts in 1806 and 1832. Mephistopheles acts as the devil. So in our book, Mephistopheles is the basis quite largely for Woland. So, for example, there's a reference to a black poodle, which actually follows Faust into his study and reveals itself as the devil to him, which to me seemed like a very specific animal to pick, but nonetheless, it's a very famous animal representing the devil in this type of literature, funnily enough. Um, so Faust is frustrated with the vanity of scientific, humanitarian, and religious learning and wants to turn to magic for the ability to have ultimate knowledge. And like I said, the devil appears to him as a black poodle. So Woland has a lot of black poodle marks on him. He has a cane with a black poodle. He has a necklace. So Bulgakov really, really, really likes to reference this story. Um, and specifically the deal. Faust makes a deal with the devil. The devil will do everything that Faust wants while he is here on earth. If during that time Faust is so pleased with anything the devil gives him that he wants to stay in that moment forever, he will do the devil's bidding in hell. Gretchen, Faust's love, is also referred to as Margarita, which is the woman that the master loves in our story. So Bulgakov pretty blatantly took from a lot of Faust, and I think he did that deliberately because he was really interested in this play with humans and deific figures and what it means to want to adopt kind of the power that they can bestow on us and what it means to believe in those things versus not, which I think a lot of those people in 20th century Russia around the time Bulgakov was alive were interested in dealing with because I think in tumultuous societies, you gravitate towards wondering if there is a higher power that can someday help you or if there is some answer at the end of all of the hardship. The next slide. Okay, so what does Woland have to do with all of this? The epigraph of the novel is actually taken from Faust as well. Who are you then? I'm a part of that power which eternally wills evil and works good. And that's the devil speaking, Mephistopheles, and that's directly related to our devil, Woland. There are themes of atheism, control versus the inevitable, and the consideration of good and evil in our daily lives. We can think about oppressive political regimes and the human experience with them. When order is imposed externally, such as the extreme measures employed by Woland to emphasize human powerlessness or by Stalin to maintain political power, the personal experience of those upon whom order is imposed becomes so detached from reality that the randomness and chaos is heightened, not reduced. So I think that Bulgakov really wanted to play with the character Woland and his kind of ability to play with human beings and confuse them and make them feel as though they were experiencing things they would have never guessed would happen to them because it was directly related to how people felt in the regime. So Otto said, it makes me think of how rap hip hop artists take classic songs and sample them to make new music with a familiar twist. Yeah, exactly. There's a lot of, it's fun to cross reference. I think artists have a lot of fun with that, especially once you really kind of dive into the pool, so to speak. You almost get overwhelmed by how interconnected things are. But like, so the epigraph is suggesting that Woland is not only evil, but also is a large worker of good. Which is kind of a strange thing to accept because he does do some nasty things to people during the book, but also does really nice things like reunite the master and Margarita. So it's kind of difficult for us to really pinpoint what he's about. Magical realism, obviously. You could turn to probably the later pages of the book and see that there's a lot of wacky, funny stuff going on, like giant cats. Behemoth is one of my favorite characters. He's a cat that's the size of, I think, a cow, or it depends what scene you read. He kind of can change size and stuff like that. But I think that acts as a representation of the confusion and the chaos associated with the Bolshevik regime. Woland does not torture because he wants to, but exposes humanity's evil as an exposition. When the novel starts, he introduces himself as a foreigner visiting that wants to experience Kiev. And I think that he literally is a foreigner in the sense that he holds up a mirror to others, and I think acts as Satan in that he shows the depravity of humanity. Um, so he appreciates good people, but he punishes severely those that aren't good to him. So he's both an evil and a good entity who reunites the Master and Margarita, as aforementioned. And there's a lot of kind of this idea of the convergence of opposing ideas and concepts. Um, Everything is drawn heavily from Mephistopheles. Um, the devil in this case is manipulative yet honorable, ruthless yet generous. And I think that this is directly represented in the book. So Woland comes into town and basically tricks everyone into writing contracts for him to have a black magic show at a very famous theater. Um, and so he has this show, and I think that this is a direct representation of how he's trying to make an expose on the depravity of people. So there's one trick in the show where they open ladies' shops on the stage and ask whoever they want to come up. Um, and the women start pushing each other and trying to take things from one another. And then when they all leave the show, all throughout the city, women start appearing in public absolutely naked or in their drawers because the clothing disappears, which is part of his trickery. Um, and so he put on the show, I think, to demonstrate that he's trying to reveal to people that they are doing things that aren't that don't show their good nature. And so he's kind of a devil that draws out the bad, or reveals it as opposed to just creates evil. Okay, go to the next slide. So then, intertwined in the main story, we have the story of Yeshua, Matthew, Levi, and Pontius Pilate, which at first seems, I guess, if you know that a lot of Russian authors love this religious theme, it can seem kind of random. And I think that Bulgakov actually recognized that and had a few of the characters make fun of the master in the book for writing a story so random as it seems about Pontius Pilate. Um, so they actually integrate the master's written story, and at first we don't realize that it was written by a character in the story. Um, it's a counterpoint narrative to the main action in Moscow and Kiev, and Yeshua's empathy guilts Pilate. So we actually are presented with the scene of when Yeshua, which is I think the Aramaic name for Jesus, um, goes up to Pontius Pilate and is put on trial by him, so to speak. And it talks a lot about how Yeshua guesses that Pilate has a headache from the smell of rose oil throughout the halls, and he wants to go lay with his dog Banga. And I think that Pilate feels very guilty about having to sentence Yeshua because he sensed maybe some sort of empathetic side to him. Um, and so because of the sentencing, Pilate actually spends 2,000 years in limbo after his death with his faithful dog Banga. Um, he is finally set free when Woland, the devil, actually encourages the master to complete his novel by granting Pilate liberty, results in Yeshua being reunited with Pilate. So there's kind of like a multi-dimensional thing going on here where you have essentially the master in one story, who's an author, and he paused a lot of his writing, even though it's actually quite brilliant. It's just underground and it's censored. And the devil tells the master to complete the book, and then it frees Pilate in this other dimension within the story within the story. Um, so the Pilate human authority that is inevitably a slave to physical inhibitions. So Pilate represents kind of the human concept of authority, and Yeshua can be a representative of the godly authority that eternally prevails. Once again, I find that a lot of Russian authors like to gravitate towards the idea that there is some sort of higher being or goodness. You can see it in Dostoevsky. I'm trying to think of other ones, but essentially, I think that they had such a hard time, and there was so much negativity going on and poverty that um, I noticed that they really heavily gravitated towards that desire to trust in something at least. And then Matthew Levi was faithful but disorganized chronicler of Yeshua. And I think this is kind of a funny example of just Bulgakov being funny and putting a twist on something that we know very well, but wouldn't necessarily have thought of Matthew Levi as being a person that was disorganized and so on and so forth. All right, next slide. Okay, so just some themes, because you can probably tell now there's a lot going on here. And I mean, you could talk about so many aspects of this book, whether you consider just the magical realism or religious themes or the plot itself. There's a lot of ways that you can attack the book. So it's not a bad thing if you feel a little confused, because I think the book is confusing, but I think that's why people like it at the same time. There's a lot of just things that converge and are interconnected. So courage versus cowardice. Yeshua describes cowardice as one of the worst characteristics to have, or at least that's represented. And I was really interested as to why that was. I think maybe in his case it was because he endured the ultimate thing in order to do what. Let's see. Otto said, oppressed peoples look for reason because the randomness of chaos is too difficult to bear. Yes. And I think that's directly represented in the book, where you just have so many random things happening to people and they're absolutely shocked by it and don't know what to do with it, really. So it's nice to have some sort of line to converge on and agree upon, and something to look towards for just stability of some sort. So I think maybe cowardice, he was saying, was one of the worst things to have, is because maybe in his life he had to deny cowardice in order to accomplish what he was meant to do. Art and authenticity, the master versus his censors. So the master kind of is appreciated by the devil, strangely, because he has such a true and good story, and it has very legitimate roots, whereas a lot of the people censoring him in the story kind of ruined his life, and it wasn't stuff that was considered, I think, wholesome or truly art in the context of the plot. The ambiguity of good and evil. Woland and his retinue clearly are very confusing people. They're very nice to Margarita, but to some of the people who own the apartment buildings, they do really interesting things to them. Love and hope, the master and Margarita. So Margarita waited for a very long time for the master, a couple of months, and he was in all of the characters after they encountered the devil were sent to Dr. Stravinsky, I think his name was, which was a home for I think mentally ill people who have went crazy, and a lot of them were talking about their experiences with this Woland. And so it was also kind of a funny part of the novel that the doctor was overwhelmed with how many people were going to his office because they had trouble with a giant cat. So Matt said, I think keep the faith with his ideals is how the author coped. Right. Yeah. So I think if we have standards for ourselves in a way that can give us the confidence to keep moving forward. It's like kind of a ideal respect for yourself. Oh, he did? Okay, we're gonna have to check out. Otto said Matt wrote a beautiful poem about love. I'd love to hear it sometime. Love is a huge theme in Russian literature, which is really funny because it seems like a pretty hardcore, cold, massive place. But I think that a lot of these authors really focused on love and shared love, especially Dostoevsky, actually, which you know that, Otto. So, and then the danger and absurdity of Soviet society. So I think magic realism, ambiguity of what could happen each day. I think that magical realism was kind of a funny way for Bulgakov to actually talk about the really dark fact that you didn't know what was going to happen to you every day. So you could literally encounter the devil and get beheaded from slipping on sunflower oil. when you're at the pools for I forget what they were called, patriarch pools, I think, or something like that. In the first chapter of the book, that's what happens to Berlioz, which is a very random way to start a book, but I think magical realism likes to do that. Okay, we'll go to the next slide. So this was a quote that I thought was really cool, and Woland says this, and it's, "What would your good do if evil did not exist, and what would the earth look like if shadows disappeared from it?" Gesturing towards what we talked about kind of before. He's a multi-dimensional person, and so is our world. And I think that Bulgakov recognized this in his own society, and loved how multidimensional his world was, but also recognized that there was a lot of hardship to come from it, and I think hoped that also beauty would be emphasized out of it. So, for example, Bulgakov was absolutely obsessed with his hometown Kiev. He really, really loved it and describes some scenes of Kiev in the book. Yes, contrast is a great word. Shadow and light. And so I think that that's a really interesting thing, is even though he did have such a hard time with being censored and finding work, he absolutely loved his hometown. Okay, next slide. Manuscripts don't burn. If you're someone that likes to quote things and impress people, I would memorize this. It's a really, really famous quote, and it was kind of made very dear to a lot of Russian people, just referring to the censorship and getting rid of pre-revolutionary and foreign books. And this was a phrase by Woland in the book, because the master actually tries to burn his story about Pontius Pilate when he's afraid that he's going to get arrested for his story. So this is probably one of the more famous lines from the story in general. I'm sure, or I mean, it's likely that you have heard it probably somewhere. Yeah, exactly. Otto said, "Because once a thought is read, it exists forever." That's what it's saying. I mean, it's perpetuated, and it matters. And I think this is also very Fahrenheit 451, where they're burning all of the books and whatnot, but and not to spoil that book if you haven't read it, but at the end, and I think this is how it ends, I kind of forget, but a bunch of the survivors get together and essentially start reworking old books that have been burned from their memory. And so that's just kind of an indication that if you work together and use that capacity for intellect and critical thinking, that you can survive oppressive things. So then we'll go to the next slide. So just some questions and things to consider. Once again, this is a hefty bite. There's a lot going on. There's a lot of characters. Russian authors love to do that, and then they love to confuse you with multiple names for one person. But that being said, I think it's okay to pick any aspect you like, and analyze the book from there, and then realize that there are just going to be a lot of things that converge and are interrelated. And sometimes if you have a loose end and you're confused about one thing, it's okay to go to another thing and think about it. But there's a lot going on here. And my version specifically, it has this cover art. And I think that's just kind of just a gesture towards how much is going on in this book and how much confusion and chaos was going on in the time. So what themes stuck out most to you in the novel? Which characters? Did anything seem confusing or ambiguous? Did you appreciate Woland or despise him? What about his retinue? And is cowardice truly as bad as it's made out to be? Why or why not? And then Matt said, let me see. I think that is a powerful point about the big paradox, that evil is required to illuminate and even define good. Big paradoxes teach deeply. Yes, I think so too. It's kind of a hard one to accept, because you don't want to support evil. So when I was thinking about paradox. I was kind of like, well, I don't really want to seem like I enjoy the bad things in life because I don't. But at the same time, if they didn't exist, it is true that you wonder how would good manifest. So it's confusing and it's a lot to think on. And I do like this book because it can make you very meditative through its strange ways. Um, so yeah, and I think there's one more slide with pictures, and then we can go back to the questions if anyone wants to. So these are just some art adaptations. There's the Behemoth. The top left, I think, is Stalin and Lenin. They didn't really like each other. They kind of got at each other's throat for a little while there, and politically, I think they interacted quite a bit. Um, I read a little bit about them. I'm not sure exactly, but there was just a lot of tumultuous activity in politics in the early 20th century, and I think uh, Russia became kind of more what we think of it now, or maybe earlier than the 20th 21st century, because largely of these two people. And then in the bottom left, I think Satan got his head cut off, and Kiev as well, but you can see them sitting together. And then Otto said, I appreciate evil characters because to ignore evil is being naive. Evil exists, and that gives us the ability to appreciate good. Yeah, I think so too. I think that's a good point. So, did you want to go back to the question slide, McKenna? And then I think I went through everything. But if anyone wanted to make any comments or anything like that. And I have my copy too, so I can go to different pages and so on and so forth. But we can also talk about these things generally. For example, the cowardice phenomenon. I'm still contemplating that and deciding whether I agree with Yeshua or not. Um, so I'm trying to think of other attributes that could be considered as negative or worse. But for some reason, Bulgakov really emphasizes cowardice in this book. So
If we're done with the question slide, I can stop sharing our screen and we can take just a group picture to have for the Facebook, unless you guys want to keep looking at the pictures.
sure, whatever everyone wants. Oh, Otto said.
I think Matt's still making a comment as well.
Oh yes, okay, perfect.
Yeah, that's fine. We can totally wait.
It's hard to have courage. It's exhausting. You have to be strong. Yeah. And a lot of the time with courage, you feel very alone maybe, or like you're doing something by yourself, and so it takes a lot of that independent thinking and realizing that what you're doing might produce the result that you want without necessarily having others backing you up. I think that's a funny thing, that cowardice maybe often involves group thinking, and courage involves a lot of independent thinking, which can be really hard.
I can say. Right.
Get the great themes of the novel, but appreciate view of
The
for
flow,
of the writing that instantly
insistently.
is the story.
Say,
Rapidly forward.
Hmm. Yeah, I think you were talking about the flow of the writing in the novel, Matt, and I have to say that he really captured my interest throughout the book, and there was something about the way that he was funny. I'm talking about Bulgakov, and had so many different characters that it was very entertaining, um, and especially because the characters were so strange, and you had so many random things that could happen that you almost wanted to turn each page and find out what would happen next because it all seemed so random. But the flow of the writing, I think, was really good. There was a lot of really good description and really good imagery, and really unique stuff, I think. So Matt said, I get the great themes of the novel, but I appreciate the flow of the writing that insistently moves the story rapidly forward. Yes. Okay. Totally get what you're saying. This book was actually, even though it's pretty dense, it was hard for me to put down because of that. Um, and some of the stuff that was just so hilarious, I think I really liked, and kept me moving through the book too. Thank you. So Matt said he likes the points. Thank you. And Otto said humor is a great emotional release. You either laugh or cry. Yes, which is kind of funny. I think our body actually looks very similar when, so we have a bunch of different emotional states, but physiologically we look, or we perform the same. So um, if you think like blood vessels, stuff like that, so you get a lot of the same, I think, benefits from things like humor that you would if you were in a way experiencing sadness or feeling profound, um, or laughing. So, okay, cool. I encourage you to do that, Matt. I think you might get a little lost because there is so much. I'm still a little lost in it, but it's really fun. And then you start to find different Russian authors too that are really, kind of related to this guy. That's kind of how I've been going deeper into these books specifically. Thank you, Otto. I love the book club too. It's so much fun. And it keeps me on my reading. I've been reading more probably than I have in the past.
So I'm going to go ahead and take these questions off just so we can all look at each other and finish up our conversations. And so that way I can get some pictures of the chat. And then in a
Sure.
couple minutes, we can take a group picture.
Sure. Trying to think of other books, Russian books that are similar to this guy. A lot of, if you're interested in, if anyone's interested in magical realism, a lot of the Russian authors are actually really fond of E.T.A. Hoffman. I think with huge books like this, we get more every time we read them. Yes, I think so too, Matt. And you get really, like, I'm trying to figure out how to say this. It's very meditative actually to have such a large book that you need to finish, or you want to, because you end up spending quite a few hours, with yourself and your brain. And I think that can I mean, I find that I feel changed after I spend so much time reading. And I perceive things so differently than I did before, which is probably why a lot of people say that reading makes you smarter. I'm reading Life of Pi right now for English class. It seems convoluted like this novel. Yes. I think I read that when I was a freshman or a sophomore. That's a very sad book, but really cool as well. Um, I'm trying to remember. That's the one with the animals on the boat. Right. Yeah. I think I read that in detention, actually. They had a like a 4 hour detention where you're punished where you can only bring a book, but I did not find that to be that bad of a punishment. So I was like, whatever, you know. So Matt said, I think we're deepened as people as we read. Yes, I think so too. It's kind of like you feel like when you talk to other people or interact with them, you learn something. I think people feel that way about movies too. Um, and with books as well, it's almost like you are literally watching people and their personalities and things unfold. Otto said, "Preach." um, and yeah, I mean, it's literally like you're making an appointment with your brain, and you're just thinking about different personalities and perspectives and really strange different situations that you wouldn't be in. And I think that makes the world seem very big. Yeah, it wasn't bad. They said that you could bring reading material and that was it. Matt said the detention, he thinks the detention was good. And it was actually a great place to sit in a desk and just read, and it was very quiet, and it had the effect of a library. Otto said he's in awe of authors. Yes, that's a good and a bad thing because then there's too many cool authors, and then it's hard to keep up with homework. But I am too, you know, especially this one. I didn't really know much about Bulgakov before, but I have heard multiple things about this book. So then I was like, try to read it. But you read The Grand Inquisitor, Otto, which is intense, and that's a really great one to read. And I think a lot of people love Dostoevsky.
So really quickly, just before anyone has to leave, since it's past 12, I want to make sure we can get a group picture. So everyone have their cameras on, and then I'll do a countdown and we'll take pictures.
Okay.
Okay, ready? So 1, 2, 3. Do one more just to make sure, okay? 1, 2, 3. Okay, cool, awesome.
Thank you. So Matt said,
Thank you,
I think
McKenna.
watch the way an author inserts himself and we learn a lot. Yes. And Matt, you might have fun looking into, I forget exactly what they're called, but there's different schools of thought in literature where you can either look at the book from who the author was or look at the book as a piece in itself. I learned about that in a class. I forget what it's called exactly, but it's a pretty interesting way to tackle a book because I'm fond of looking at the author, because inevitably I think they're going to be within the work, but there's a lot of people that want to think more abstractly about art, and they look at just the book in itself without thinking whatsoever about the author. So that's kind of fun to do as well. But yeah, I mean, I think Bulgakov is heavily inserted in this book. Artists always bring a piece of themselves into their work. Yep. I mean, I think when you're an author, you crave that. That's how you represent yourself. And so I think that's a really great way to express or show a representation of yourself. And I think in this case, I think Bulgakov, struggling so much with being censored, actually describes some very intimate scenes where he was depicting himself as the master. Cool. Me too, Matt. I'm glad you're here. It's a lot of fun. But yeah, I think in the scene where the master is actually burning his manuscripts, I think I read somewhere that that actually happened to Bulgakov. I think he burned and destroyed the copies of this book actually multiple times, which is insane. I can't imagine writing this and then destroying it.
Shelly and Otto, I don't know if you heard when we started the call today, but Danielle got into med school. She's just starting med school. She got in.
Where are you going?
I'm gonna go to St. George.
Now, where's that?
It's a Caribbean med school.
Oh my gosh, so exciting.
Yeah, I thought I'd apply because of COVID, they didn't require an MCAT. So I was like, okay, I'm doing that.
Oh my gosh, Addison, we're waiting to hear from Mount Sinai in New York. They're supposed to send out admissions or rejections. They were supposed to do it yesterday, and then now they're like, we'll do it sometime this weekend.
Yeah.
So
like a hot bath or something, just relax.
Oh my God. Yesterday we were on pins and needles, just waiting all day. That's so exciting. Congratulations, Danielle. We need more doctors.
Yeah, we do. Well, I think it's hard because the requirements to just kind of get your foot in the door is a lot. So
it's been a 2-year process.
Yeah.
It's been a 2-year process for Addison, just taking the MCAT, and especially now with COVID.
Yes.
It's crazy. He was going to retake it because he didn't really like his first score. And then it was, they kept canceling it. They kept saying, just the testing sites kept getting canceled at the last minute. And so he just used the scores he had and then just applied. And so, yeah, it's crazy. It's crazy. But that is, I agree with Matt. I think you're going to be an excellent doctor. You're so empathetic and you're a great listener. And I think that's part of what happens in the medical profession is they forget about the soft skills. So,
right.
Yeah. I'm so excited for you.
Thank you.
And then you can still do book club because,
because
they'll have an internet connection.
Exactly. Well, and I think a lot of it's online right now.
Cool. Yeah.
Which was kind of another thing I actually liked, just because it is so far. So I was kind of like open to the idea of easing into it with the online learning. But yeah, I mean, definitely down to keep doing book club.
One of the good things about the pandemic, I think we should watch for your graduation. Yes. So exciting. I love that life is going on even though COVID. People are making plans for the future, and I'm so happy.
They're trying, they're looking towards that ideal or whatever, like we talked about, just trying to chug forward and stuff like that.
Yeah, that's what Otto said the other day, that he just enjoys still being challenged by reading these kinds of books. And because if you forget the bigger picture. Like if the Russians could live through
Right.
all their horror,
Right.
we could put up with movie theaters not being open.
Right. Reading is not a bad hobby to have right now. Like if you're a reader, you're kind of stoked because you have so much, time. Well, it's like a lot of home time. I find that I'm overwhelmed now because I'm finishing books that I've always wanted to, but I'm kind of like opening a rabbit hole because then you start adopting more and you're like, oh my God. But yeah, not a bad hobby to have right now. Yeah, I guess we'll see how everything goes with the pandemic. It's such a strange time. It's gone by really fast and really slow at the same time. So we've been in it for almost a year, right? Something like that. But and it's taken quite a while to get here, but at the same time it's like, wow, we're here. So see how the rest of the year plays out.
Well, I love seeing everybody on here. It was really nice to have you guys here from St. Louis. Is that where you're from too, Matt? Are you from St. Louis?
Are you from St. Louis?
Yes.
That's great.
You got a lot of books there too, Matt.
I love.
I love the bookshelves behind you so much, Matt. I want that for my office.
That's a good place to Zoom, actually. That's a cool background.
Yeah, don't you think so, Danielle? I'm wanting to do that.
Just put like a huge wall.
Yeah, because I love my books and they're everywhere and you can't see them. I want to pull them all out and put them on shelves like that.
Yeah, I think so. I think that's cool.
Here. Zoom.
Well, say thank you.
Yes.
I love it, Matt. It's really nice. So Danielle, did you, I've been a little distracted. Sorry, Garrett was texting me while this was going on, but did you guys talk at all, because I missed it, about what book we're going to do next?
Oh, not really. I'm open to anything.
What about you, Otto? Are you recommending a book? I loved your last one. It was honestly my favorite book that I've ever met, and the author. I loved that book so much.
Oh, A Paragon. Yeah, that was cool.
Yes.
I learned a lot about that situation that I had absolutely no idea about.
I know, me too. And I love that the author wasn't from either of those countries.
Right, yeah.
That's what made it so cool.
I found
that he was.
What were you gonna say?
That he was Irish and had written, about that conflict in Ireland and then made that pivot.
Yeah.
To learn to care.
I think so too.
How's your family, Danielle? How's your dad? What's going on with his? Is he really busy at the hospital?
He's doing good. They pretty much minimize his hospital time just because of COVID, whatever. I mean, he still does clinic and stuff, but they do a lot of Zoom stuff. We could contemplate for a few days, but what? Just what do you think about David Sedaris? I don't think I know David Sedaris. Let me look him up on my phone.
He's a humorist. He's not politically correct at all.
Okay.
He does short stories. He's done novels.
Yeah, I'd love to.
He's fun, but he's not for everyone. I mean, we think he's funny. We think he's funny, but he's not politically correct. But but he pokes fun at himself too. He pokes fun at the world. it's almost like how the last book can poke fun at religion. You know what I mean? Like poke fun at everything, because if you poke fun at everything, then you open the veil to say, you know, everything has gray areas, whatever.
Right. Exactly. I'd be down. Which one? I see there's Me Talk Pretty One Day, Calypso, Naked, When You're Engulfed in Flames. Yeah, I've never heard. I like reading authors I haven't read, so.
Well, check it out and see. Like you can read some synopsis and see if it's too, like I said, we think he's funny.
Oh, Matt likes David Sedaris.
Yeah, he's he does. He makes you feel like life can be managed. He grew up, I want to say North Carolina. Where's RISD? No, I don't know. He grew up in either North Carolina or somewhere, but David Sedaris is gay, but he wasn't able to be gay until he was an adult. And so he grew up in a very conservative Southern family and lifestyle. And I don't know, I just think his take on life is just
right. I think this looks cool.
So he's written a lot of books, and so check it out and see. But that would be kind of, I don't know, it's like a modern day poke fun at the establishment.
I think that's kind of cool. Just from Googling him, it says that he's a very unique author in that he has published so many consecutive bestsellers. So he's like pretty well known. Yeah, I'll look it up. You know, I think so.
Oh, that'd be fun.
Okay. Cool.
All
All right, you guys. I hope you have a beautiful, beautiful weekend.
Thank you.
Thank you, Danielle and Otto, for making this happen, guys.
Thanks.
Nice meeting everybody.
Thanks for joining.
And thank you for letting us in. Thank you.
Thank you so much. We'll see you guys next time.
Everyone.
Okay.
Bye.
Okay.